tend to like to make sure these things start on time. What I'd like to do is I'm presenting a bunch of information. We've been trying to get the computers to cooperate, and they've been a little cranky this morning. But I'm going to do, it's about an hour presentation. It's actually shortened just a little bit from that. I've given this talk for close to 5 years now, and I revise it periodically as new information comes up. So you're getting the new, hopefully improved version of this talk. My little remote thing that changes the slides doesn't work, so I've got my lovely assistant down there helping move the slides for me, so that won't. But if you'll hold your questions till the end, I'm happy to answer questions, and typically when I give this, I spend as much time answering questions as I did giving my talk. But I titled this talk, well, with the methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency, but I really subtitle it as Help from the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project, the whole goal of the project was to find genetic problems that we could then identify why they were causing the problems and come up with a treatment that treated it at the cause rather than just treating the symptoms down the road. This is the first and so far the only one of the genetic defects from the Human Genome Project that has an FDA-reviewed treatment for it. So this is not a complete answer for everything. The human genome is very large, and we're going to have a lot more answers down the road, but if they were going to pick one to start with, this is a darn good one to pick from, because it affects so many things and affects so many people. Excellent. So I'm not selling anything. This isn't I was talking to somebody about it, and they says, well, is this like a multi-level marketing? Where do I sign up? It's not that, okay? And then I have to give a legal disclaimer. I'm not prescribing anything so that the lawyers don't come after me. But what I want to do is give you some information that will help you, hopefully, in your situation. Is it going to work for everybody? I can guarantee it won't, because there are so many things. But a lot of the chronic, ill-defined, difficult-to-treat problems are associated with this gene defect. Now, when I started, and there's a test on this thing. No. When I started, my son got really sick after he was doing missionary work in Chile. And I had this poster on my wall, and we went through this. He was studying biochemistry, but he could only function on about 15 minutes a day. And we pored over that poster to try and figure out what to do. And we're talking about one reaction right here. I know that you don't have to remember that. That's like, but what I want to point out is that this is a very, very complex problem. And my son thinks I simplify it too much. I have others that think I don't simplify it enough. So I'm probably relatively close. So the goal here is to give you some practical things that you can get that, quite honestly, you don't even have to have a prescription to do what I'm talking about, although sometimes the prescriptions are the cheapest way to do some of it. But this is something that, for a lot of people, will really make a big difference. When they first discovered this gene, it was in 1995. But they only discovered one of the two real common genes, which was the 677. So when you look at studies, research studies, you'll see that a lot of those studies are based off of the 677. Well, the worst problem is if you have A677 and a 1298. So they were missing the people with the worst symptoms from this gene defect. So 2001 they discovered MTHFR. In 2005 they actually compiled the research into this book called MTHFR Polymorphisms in Disease. Now technically, politically correct terminology is not defect because that's bad, right? It's actually a polymorphism, it's just different. But if it causes me trouble, it's a defect. So, just to let you know, I'm using a politically incorrect term and I know it and I don't care. But the reality is that these aren't the only ones out there. There's actually now close to 50 that have been identified. These are considered the mild defects in MTHFR. What are the severe ones? Those kids don't last past a year. Many of them die from stillbirth, miscarriage, or are very ill and die within the first year of life. So, but when you get these, if you do the test and get this gene defect back, that's not the complete answer, and I absolutely know that. I've got both genes defective on the MTHFR. The next step in the pathway is methionine synthase. I have both genes defective on methionine synthase. The next step in the pathway is methionine synthase reductase. I have both genes defective on that one too. So what I'd really like, my ideal, would be a test that would test all of this pathway so that I could identify every blockage in this, or partial blockage in this pathway. Now it's not a complete blockage or you wouldn't live, but a partial blockage causes a lot of disease processes. Next. And what we're talking about here is that this is folic acid. Folic acid is very common. It's in all your vitamins. Every vitamin, multivitamin has folic acid in it pretty much. But the folic acid you get both in your diet and in the vitamins are folic acids that are inactive. They're not ready for your body to use. So this one is the one you get in your vitamin pill. This is what's in your diet for the most part. If it doesn't get to here, it's as if you do not have it. Now you can go to the health food store and actually get this one called folinic acid, and it says it's a more active form. True, but the blockage we're talking about is here. Well, what happens if you have both genes defective? If you've got either two of the 1298 or two of the 677, this process from here to here functions on about 10% of normal. 10 to 30% depending on which study you're looking at, but the ones within the body, they figure about 10%. So if you're functioning on 10% of normal and your requirements for whatever reason, puberty, illness, whatever reason, go up, you can't compensate. Well, the other thing we've found is there are certain environmental things that affect the same pathway. So what we're talking about is not a lack of folic acid. If you go test these people, their folic acid levels are fine because it's measuring the top two. Actually, it's measuring all of them together, but it's not telling us how much you're getting into the active form. Well, why is that important? Next slide. Well, first of all, if you can't activate folic acid, then you can't do things like make the things that let your nerves talk to each other. So when you don't make serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, you get things like depression, anxiety, irritable bowel, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and migraines. The primary psychiatry a number of years ago came out and said those are all the same genetic disorder. They just are different manifestations of that. So what we have is an FDA approved or reviewed treatment. And the difference between approval and reviewed is where it's a natural substance, it's not a compound that they made, so it's a review. The FDA review it and then it's released. It's reviewed for things like depression, anxiety, memory loss, nerve healing and wound healing in diabetics, and also a whole litany of problems associated with pregnancy. So that's what they studied and got the studies to get it through the FDA. There's another group of things that are also associated with the same pathway. And what those are things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, irritable bowel, migraines, bipolar schizophrenia, and some of the autism spectrum, the ADD, ADHD, and also birth defects. Those all have been associated with this pathway. And so it really is something that if we can identify people that are struggling in this area and supplement past it, then we can help improve their life. Is it going to solve all their problems? No. I can guarantee you it's not going to solve every problem you have. It won't solve your 18-year-old teenager problem. Not that any of you would have any of that, but okay. Next. So who has this? Well, about a third of the population has both genes defective. Another 40% has one gene defective of the two common ones. But interestingly enough, some of the environmental things cause the same issue. One of the most noted ones is BPA. What's BPA?
Plastic.
The plastic stuff. They tell you not to microwave in plastic because it's bad for you. Drop stuff into your food. Well, why is it bad for you? It blocks the same pathway. So if you've got both genes defective and you get the environmental toxicity on top of that, which is one of the models they think is associated with fibromyalgia, you then have gotten into real trouble and potentially get very, very ill. So, but if you look at who would benefit, that's a pretty good share of the population in the United States. The country that has the highest incidence of this gene defect is Italy. And then the lowest incidence is sub-Saharan Africa. And I have my theories, but anyway, we won't go into my fantasies. So when you're talking about folic acid, and you compare that to giving somebody folic acid versus giving them the active form of folic acid, you have to take a whole bunch of folic acid in order to make the amount of active form of folic acid that you would get if you just took the active form of folic acid. And so it's much more efficient to take that. The other problem is that you've got to get it into the parts of the body where it needs to go. So one of the problems, and this is, I was talking to a group of chemists and they said, well, if you're only making it at 10%, you just 10 times the dose and you'll be fine. The problem with that is that the folic acid blocks your ability for the active form of folic acid to get into the brain. So if you've got regular folic acid at high levels, what little methylfolate you make can't get into the brain. So you're better off to get it into where it needs to go, into the cells and into the brain. You need to take it in its active form. So what happens if you have low methylfolate? Well, you don't make serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and those are all of the neurotransmitters that are associated with depression. So when we treat depression, we're treating the symptoms of low levels. We're not, for the most part, doing anything to raise those levels back up. This actually raises the levels back up if we give this form of folic acid. Well, it also has low glutathione. Well, what's glutathione? That's not one that's as common or commonly discussed as the serotonin. But glutathione, they've found if your glutathione level's low, your memory is poor. If your glutathione levels are high, your memory is high. Why? Well, we don't know that, but we do know what glutathione does. It's a very powerful antioxidant, and it clears all of your heavy metal and the plastic stuff, the BPA. So we're all exposed to the BPA because it's everywhere. And BPA blocks your ability to make the glutathione, and so you get into this vicious cycle. You can't clear the BPA because you can't make the glutathione because you can't make the methylfolate, and then the BPA blocks you from making even more methylfolate, and so it gets into this vicious downward spiral. The other thing is that this enzyme is one of the few enzymes in the body that's a two-reaction enzyme. It does two things instead of just one. Most enzymes in the body just do one thing. This makes methylfolate, and it makes something called tetrahydrobiopterin. Now, that's a common word, right? Y'all know that. Well, they abbreviate it BH4 because, for some reason, people have trouble remembering tetrahydrobiopterin. Well, that's needed for nerve protection, so it protects your nerves against environmental toxins. Parkinson's, for example, do you know how they get rats to test for Parkinson's disease? They give them a single dose of a pesticide, and then all of the rats have Parkinson's. Now they can test their new drug to treat the Parkinson's. But my contention is if we can protect the nerves, we're able to help some of these things. They actually have done studies where they give IV glutathione to people with Parkinson's, and it resolves the Parkinson's for a day or two, and then it goes away, and then it comes right back. So it doesn't solve it, but there's at least some interaction there. So, next slide. So, if you have then the methylfolate low, and then you get these environmental toxicities, what does it cause? Well, heavy metals. Where do we get heavy metals? Everywhere. Arsenic. Is arsenic in the water? Sure. It's at low levels, but it is in the water. And mercury is in some of our fillings, and if you have a low-level exposure and can get rid of it, it's not a problem. But people who are sick, they exclude from those studies. So people who can't clear those toxins then end up with a lot more symptoms. So you get heavy metal buildup. The other thing is that some of the medications we use cause problems with our ability to make methylfolate. Diabetic medication, metformin or glucophage. Birth control pills. Nobody ever takes those, right? What they've actually come out with now is that there are 2 birth control pills that have this form of folic acid in it for this very reason. It's starting to be recognized that, hey, this is a problem. Now, do you need to go out and get those pills? No, you can just get the vitamin and take with it. But they at least are recognizing now that's a problem and using it. And I mentioned that there are other gene defects that are associated with this. So if you've got several of them in a row, you can be in real trouble. I went home when I got my testing, and my son at the time was 17, reading the book at the table, and I said, Wesley, I want you to know I'm defective. He looks up and he goes, well, yeah. The sad part is this means you're defective too. Kids are great for entertainment. I mentioned the BPA and some of the other organic toxins build up. In fact, there's been some recent studies showing that in people who lose weight, and especially lose lots of weight, their organic toxins in their bloodstream skyrocket. And if they can't clear them, what does it do? It makes them put that right back on, because the only other place it can go is your nerves. So it's the one model now that has been postulated, and this came out summer and fall of last year, that explains the set point theory that we've seen over the last 30, 40 years. So what does heavy metals do? Well, first of all, we've known for centuries that mercury is a problem, right? What made the Mad Hatter mad? Mercury. So we've known that mercury caused problems with depression. Where does mercury work? Where does mercury block? It blocks methionine synthase, the step right after MTHFR. Well, these are a list of some of the symptoms that are associated with it. So one of the models for fibromyalgia is this idea of genetically not able to clear environmental toxins. And so when we first started seeing fibromyalgia, it was almost exclusively in their 60-plus-year-old folks. Now we're seeing it, I've seen it somebody that met all of the criteria for fibromyalgia in their late 20s. So the environmental toxin load is much higher today. I mean, 40 years ago, how many of you drank water out of a water bottle? Some of you didn't even live then. So, all right. But you can see there's just a lot of these symptoms that are associated with this kind of problem. So, is it your problem? I don't know. But what I'm saying is that if we can correct the pathway and get your body to be able to clear some of this stuff, then we can actually really improve the symptoms in a lot of folks. Environmental concerns. I mentioned that there's been some interesting studies. They did a study in India looking at low levels of arsenic. So these are not the levels that they say, oh, this is toxic. This is the, yeah, it's below the EPA guidelines, and so we're fine. They looked at low-level arsenic exposure and increased the risk of diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and high blood pressure fourfold. So in the United States, we look at that data and go, yeah, that's it again. So they repeated the study in Bangladesh. Yeah, that's Bangladesh. So then they repeated the study in the United States and showed a fourfold increase in diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and high blood pressure. So they also looked at BPA. What does BPA do? I mean, we know it blocks this same pathway. It causes increase in diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and high blood pressure. It also has this unique ability to screw up estrogen and testosterone. So one of the things that we now know is that BPA is associated with the polycystic ovary problems, as well as endometriosis, and may also affect testosterone levels as well. So they did this study, and they looked at, in the United States, we've had a fourfold increase in diabetes over the last decade, and that's a problem. And so they looked at Asia. In the United States, we blame that on two things, right? McDonald's and Nintendo. Poor diet, lack of exercise. But in Asia, they have seen somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 10-fold increase in diabetes over the same period of time. Well, Bangladesh, they have a McDonald's on every corner and a Nintendo in every house, right? Probably not so much. What they've found is that in Asia, they've had no increase in their BMI. They've had no weight increase, but still have had the same diabetic increase that we've seen in the U.S. So one of the things that came out of this article is maybe our model's wrong. We don't like it in medicine when somebody says our model is wrong, but that's the way it is. So and they did mention that it was associated with that one of the concerns and one of the things we needed to look at was these arsenic studies and the organic toxin studies. So glutathione, I want to mention a little bit about that. It's a powerful antioxidant. It clears heavy metals. And methylfolate has to be there in order for you to make it. And then specifically, tetrahydrobiopterin has to be there in order for you to make it. So if you're having that blocked by either genetics or environment, you're in trouble. You get into trouble and your memory goes, you're more prone to all of these environmental toxins that you can't clear. Okay, link with autism. A couple of studies have come out, and one study showed that 98% of kids with autism have one of these two gene defects. There was another article that came out in 2008 that says it's a two-hit model. Genetic predisposition and environmental toxicity. And indeed it listed 16 genetic defects associated with autism. Number one on the list, MTHFR. And several others on the list were this same pathway. There's a study in Los Angeles showing that if the daycare was within 1,000 feet of the freeway, those kids had, I believe, a 4-fold increase in diabetes or in autism because of the environmental toxicity. Next slide. So, and the CDC actually on February 28th of 2008 came out and said, well, the mercury in vaccines doesn't cause autism, it just aggravates it if they've got a genetic predisposition. That's what the model is showing. And there's a group in Texas, in Austin, Texas, the Thoughtful House, where all they do is treat autism. And they've had some pretty good success with treating autism just with using this nutritional protocol to help boost this pathway. Okay. Recent study, this came out in July. I actually got the article in June because they published it online the month before. What it showed was, if you look at baseline autism, and then if the women weren't taking folic acid, the risk of autism was double. But if they weren't taking folic acid and they had this gene defect, the risk for having a baby with autism was 7 times. So the folate pathway seems to be very critical in these autism spectrum, ADHD type disorders. So one of the possibilities is that because we have so many things now, first of all, very few of us eat right out of our garden. When I was growing up, in fact, what I tell people is we were a very poor family. We pretty much ate out of our garden. We lived on a farm, and that probably is what saved our life. There were 10 kids in my family, and because when we'd get cranky, my mother would give us a bucket and have us go out and pick raspberries. You know, we'd come back in with about this much raspberries in it, you know, because we ate them all. Well, it turns out that berries are one of the few foods that have this active form of folic acid. That's probably what saved our life when we were kids. So the question is, well, should I be tested for this if I'm having symptoms? Should I go out and do the test? Well, insurance covers it maybe 60–70% of the time. But the reality is if you're having symptoms, what's the likelihood that you have one of these gene defects? Pretty darn high. So it may be that it's not worth doing the test. It's about $300 in one lab, $225 at another, but it's expensive enough that it may be worth just trying the symptoms, or trying the supplements to help with that, to see if it works. Because if you get the test back and your test is negative, does it mean you don't have it at all? No, because there are some minor ones that we don't test for in the common test. So what I do is I have people try a trial of the vitamins to see if they'll help them. And then they're really all over the counter now. Now, if you do have this gene defect and you have mercury fillings, you're not going to be able to clear that mercury very well, and you probably should have the mercury fillings out. Now, apparently in this state, if you're a dentist and you say mercury fillings are bad, they yank your license. So, but if you say they're ugly, then that's okay. So that's why one of the dentists told me there were so many cosmetic dentists, because they can't say I don't like mercury because I think it's bad. They say I'm a cosmetic dentist, so then they don't have to deal with mercury. All right, I want to tell you that, and this is not a slide to run out and do this testing. What this is a slide is to say that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming down that is going to help us in this. But like I say, this is the first of the help from the Human Genome Project. This is a test where they'll do 600,000 tests on your genes. And what it showed was, out of the 50 that it tested for, I got 10 defective. I have one with both genes defective, which is the one I knew. But it's not real user-friendly. It's not easy to find the information. But what I'm saying is that I know this is not a complete answer. Is it a good answer for a lot of folks? Absolutely. So, and this is just a screenshot from the 23andMe, and it helps give you an idea about other genetic diseases, genetic problems that are associated with medications, that kind of thing. But what I'm telling you is this is just one other piece, or one piece of a very complex puzzle. But it's really a breakthrough in the way we're treating people. Because now we're not just treating the symptoms, we're actually identifying the problem and treating where the problem occurred. So, my recommendations are really threefold. One is, get rid of as much of the toxins as you can. Do that with water filters. So I would recommend a water filter. Any water filter is better than not having a water filter. Although some of the plastic jugs have BPA in it, so you want to keep it in the fridge. The colder it is, I mean, if you get the water bottle and it stays cold from when they put the water in to when you take it out, very little BPA gets in there. It's when it gets hot that the BPA goes into the water. So, you know, getting the tap one, I think the best water filter is the reverse osmosis water filters. Then you want to improve the body's metabolism. You do that with improving diet, and then supplement around these defects. And then the other thing is you want to try and clear the toxins. Now, how do you clear them? One is boosts the pathway so that your body can make the things that clear it. Sweating clears the environmental toxins. About 3% of your sweat is toxins. Part of why the infrared saunas have become popular is that boosts the amount of toxins that are in your sweat. And then you may end up, if you're, for most people, that's all they need to do. But some people are ill enough that it may be worth testing to see if they have a high heavy metal load. There's not as easy a test for the organic toxins, but if you can then get those tested, that's kind of the last on my list. I start with the other things first. Interesting now, this was in the past was kind of relegated to the alternative medicine folks, but the President's Cancer Panel of 2009 came out, and what they said was, you know what, we need to reduce the amount of toxins coming into our house. Take your shoes off, drink filtered water, avoid drinking out of water bottles, microwaving glass or ceramics, use non-toxic cleaners, because that's not only increasing our risk of cancer, it's increasing our risk of the infertility problems with polycystic ovary, and increasing our risk of just general health problems because of the toxin loads. Wash fruits and vegetables, that kind of thing. One of the things that helps, I mentioned the berries actually have the active form of folic acid. One of the things that probably saved my family is that my grandfather loved berries and always had a huge berry patch. And most of his kids did that, so my mother had one. And interestingly enough, mathematics and accounting helps with soothing some of these areas of the brain that go nuts not having enough serotonin. Your anterior cingulate cortex, that's another one, I like this, is serotonin mediated. The serotonin regulates it. So if you can't make serotonin, that part of the brain goes nuts. That's known as your gear shifter, your ability to shift from one thing to another. And so you tend to be more obsessive, more compulsive, which is great for when you try and go to school, because you've got to be compulsive enough to turn in your homework, but not so fun when you're when it becomes disruptive to your life. The interesting thing also is music helps solve this. So a lot of these people that have severe depression, music really helps with the therapy because it helps control those areas of the brain that are not being controlled with the serotonin. And then exercise helps, and we don't know why. I don't know why that's always the answer, but anyway. So when you're adding the supplement, you want to do it just one at a time. If you go out and take all 20 or 15 or whatever I have at once, you'll have some side effect and you'll have no idea where it's coming from and no idea whether or not it works or not. Plus, it's much more expensive. What I'd recommend is you try it one at a time, and what I've given you is the order that I think is worth trying. With one exception, and I'll explain that. Okay, cook and drink with filtered water. And then if you've got moderate to severe symptoms, it may be worth doing the heavy metal testing. Traditionally, we did heavy metal testing with people's hair. What they've found out is that a certain percentage of people didn't put it into their hair. Putting it into your hair is part of the healing. And so if you've got this gene defect, you don't put it into your hair very well. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk to them in order of importance. So the first one is the methylfolate. A number of different ways you can get that. The prescription forms are these first ones, Deplin, and it comes in 7.5 and 15. And it actually, if you can get a prescription for Deplin, is the cheapest per milligram dose that I've found if you get it from the mail order pharmacy that the company recommends. So then you've got Meta-NX. That's the one that's FDA approved for or reviewed for nerve healing and wound healing in diabetics. You've got Serafulin, which is the one that's FDA reviewed for memory loss. And they actually now have studies showing that it helps with early Alzheimer's. So that your Alzheimer's medications does what? It delays Alzheimer's for 6 months. That's it. This actually has been shown to delay it longer. The studies are early, but when they did the study on Deplin versus placebo, guess what had the most side effects? Placebo, because they felt so much better on the Deplin. So what we're talking about is things that are very well tolerated for most people, and sometimes can cause a little bit of stomach upset if you take them without food. Nevo is one of the 6 prenatal vitamins now that have this in, and then you can get various over-the-counter doses. I mentioned there's a Thorne brand that has both 1 milligram and 5 milligram. There's a Solgar brand that comes in 800 micrograms, so it's a tiny 400 or 800, so a tiny dose. The next one is, so after the methylfolate, then I have people try the methyl B12, because that is needed in the next step. That's also what is blocked with some of the heavy metals like mercury. So methyl B12 is, B12 in general is not absorbed real well. So if you get the active form of it and then dissolve it under your tongue, it tends to absorb better. So, and I like the Jarrow brand. That seems to be better tolerated in people that have tried various brands that, I don't know if they're that much better, but at least so far in my experience, the Jarrow seems to be better tolerated than some of the others. You can get it in injections. When I first started doing this, the methylfolate wasn't out there. And in fact, we were doing the methyl B12 injections, and I started looking, I said, I'd like to go one step earlier to where the problem occurred. I'd like to get the methylfolate. Was searching on the internet, found Deplin the week it was reviewed and approved by the FDA. And so I called the company and I says, hey, I want that stuff. They says, well, how did you hear about it? Because it's not released yet. I says, well, I read about it, that you just got reviewed by the FDA, and they say go, and they said, well, you can't have it till it's released. I says, when's that? They said 6 weeks. I said, can I be the first one on your shipping list? So it works really well, the injections for fibromyalgia. I would try the oral first. That's a lot cheaper. And for most people, that's all they need. They don't need to go to the injections. The injections, you will need a prescription. And you've got to have a pharmacy that compounds injections. Locally, the only one that does that is Mally's for injection compounding. And then there are some oral drops available for children. So some of my grandchildren were having trouble. We got the oral drops, and those really help. We put in the capsules of the methylfolate into their milk and their juice and their food and anything else we can get it in, and then we give them the drops for the B12. This is the one that's new. It's one that I actually searched for before I searched for the methylfolate. And 5 years ago, when I was searching for this, the only place I could get it was a research lab in Europe that was $12,000 a month. All right, that's a bit expensive. So then I went for the methylfolate. This now you can get. I've only had it for probably 3 or 4 months, and some people try it and it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Others try it and it's huge. It makes a huge difference. I wish I could tell them why. I'd love to have that. But if you read about this tetrahydrobiopterin, on Wikipedia it says they're studying it for its use in ADD and ADHD. Because, again, it helps with making serotonin, which is that gear shifter. It allows them to then smoothly shift from one thing to the next. Just an example, I've got one grandson that struggles some with this. Started him on it, he liked just reading stories to him. And I could get through about 1 page of one of those little things with 1 line, And when we started him on it, he sat on my lap and we read 6 books all the way through before he left. For some people, it's making a huge, huge difference. So I put on there where you get it. There's only one place I know that you can order it from. I'm trying to see if we can get it compounded locally. So, all right. The next thing is N-acetylcysteine. It's an amino acid. What does it do? Well, it's one of the key components of glutathione. So what they found is if you give methylfolate, methyl B12, and N-acetylcysteine, it really helps with memory. So that's the part, and usually I start with Deplin because it's just methylfolate, and then add the other things that make up serapholin and MET-NX. So I add those separately because then if you don't respond to one of the things very well, you'll know which one you're having trouble with. The other thing is as you start clearing some of the environmental toxins, you'll end up with clearing some of the normal minerals. So taking a mineral supplement seems to be useful. Epsom salt baths. The Epsom salt, the sulfate in the Epsom salt helps bind the toxin to your glutathione. And if you take it orally, what does it do? It cleans you out. That's what we use to clean people out for colonoscopy. So soaking it, your legs in it seems to help, or your body. And so in some people that really makes a difference on some of the symptoms. It does lower blood sugars. So if you're diabetic, you want to do it at the same time every day. Next. Vitamin B6, the active form, it's called pyridoxal 5-phosphate. If you go into the health food store and ask for that, they give you a blank stare. If you ask for P5P, they go, oh yeah, we got plenty of that. Well, that's what's in the combination that they use for nerve healing and wound healing in diabetics. The one caveat with B6, it's the only B vitamin that has any toxicity associated with it, and it causes this tight band feeling around your head. If you get that, then you want to stop the B6. And that's why I like to do them separate, because then if they get that, and only 5% or 10% of the population can't clear this as well and end up with a symptom. So, but if you're in that group, you have to throw away all the MET-NX and then start over. So that's why I like doing it separate. Vitamin C helps with a lot of these symptoms as well. It also helps regenerate glutathione, so glutathione's more effective. Dimethylglycine is one of the other things in this pathway. Zinc is important. And again, I do this in order. Flaxseed, we have lots of studies showing it helps with nerve healing and brain healing. You can get it in flaxseed, or omega-3s, you can get them in flaxseed, chia seeds. Chia seeds you don't have to grind to get them to absorb. And fish, but remember the fish oil can have the mercury in it, so you want to make sure that it says mercury removed or molecularly distilled. Vitamin E and silymarin, they said, well, you have to add silymarin to it. I said, well, what does that do? It says it boosts your glutathione. I said, all right, anything that boosts my glutathione, I'm good with. It's milkweed thistle, but again, these are things you can get over the counter at the health food store. And then you can now, glutathione, if you take it orally, is destroyed by the stomach. There's a couple of oral preparations that absorb well. One of them's a liquid and it tastes like rotten eggs. So I wasn't so fond of that one, but there's one I mentioned on here that by Thorne that actually has shown to absorb. When you first start taking it, sometimes it'll actually make the symptoms worse because you're clearing toxins. So I usually have people take it for like 3 days and then off for a couple of weeks and then just do it like every other weekend for a while. You can get eventually so you can take it every day, but I would build up to that. So it's really a trial and error. It's not something that I can tell you, yeah, if you take this in this order, it'll cure everybody. It's too complex of a system for that. There is a need to remove the toxins on some people. That depends on how severe your symptoms are. And I'm hoping someday I'll have a test that I can just say, hey, this is what you need. You need this one, and that one, and forget about the rest of them. Questions? Yeah?
Do you find that there's a higher